Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the next installment of Coffee with the Ambassador. Today we have, as I think, very interesting guest, Axel van Trotsenburg, which is not exactly an Austrian name, but there is an Austrian connection, Axel. So maybe let's start off with the connection to our country. What is your connection to Austria?
Well, my connection with Austria started exactly 50 years ago. My father accepted a professorship in Klagenfurt. At that time, the University of Klagenfurt was founded, and he was at the time professor in Amsterdam in Holland. So we were Dutch, and we moved to Austria to a new chapter, and that was in July 2000, in 1971. I still remember the flight on the 6th of July 71. And since then, that journey started in Austria. And so, I'm living with two hearts. We still speak Dutch at home.
Okay.
But I did my education in Austria, and of course know Austria very well. And I come back every year to mainly Purchach.
How many years did you spend in Austria at the time?
Well, I did my gymnasium in Klagenfurt. I did my studies in economics in Graz.
Okay.
Did a master's degree. I also eventually did my PhD in Vienna.
Wow.
But I left Austria permanently was probably in '83 because I went to Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
In Bologna. And then I studied also in Canada, and then I moved to the OECD already in Paris before going to the World Bank. But the constant was always coming back to see the family.
Your mom is Austrian, right?
Yeah, my mom, but unfortunately she passed away as a result of COVID in April. It was still my siblings are in Austria,
right?
And so we return with pleasure.
Well, it's great that you kept up the connection. I remember we talked a number of months ago. You were kind of in Austria at the time. You worked
Correct.
home office from Austria for a while, which in COVID times kind of works. So it's great to have an Austrian, Dutch, international with us. You are now managing director of the World Bank, which is of course a huge job because the World Bank, I mean the name alone, World Bank, it's not focused on a tiny problem of a single country, but it really covers the whole spectrum. You said the journey led through the OECD to Washington. How did that
go? Well, I had studied in Canada and also in Vienna. I dealt with debt problems.
Okay.
And at that time at the OECD, they wanted to do a study on the debt problem, but they also wanted to compare it with the famous transfer debate in Germany in the 20s after this was related to the reparation payments after the First World War. And there was a lot of German literature, so they wanted also to have a German speaker. So that was a pure coincidence.
Okay.
And so I started there, and then I got the YP, the Young Professionals Program, at the OECD. But almost at the same time, I got then the offer from the World Bank, and then I saw that the World Bank provided for more options.
Sure.
And I took that position.
And you took that decision when?
That position was like yesterday, 88.
88.
33 years ago, so
wow.
We moved there. And so I've been with the bank since October 88, yes.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, you have spanned really decades at the World Bank. And we talked about it a little bit before, that we have seen, as of late, we've seen a huge shift to Africa, that almost half of the money the World Bank spends a year goes to Africa. It didn't used to be like that in the World Bank.
That is correct. I think that there have been massive changes in World Bank operations. It's also a good signal that if you want to stay relevant as a multilateral institution, you have to go with the times.
Right.
You have to learn and you have to adjust. And for example, in Africa, there are major challenges. So one of the things is that if you think 20 years ago, we would spend maybe 3.5 billion per year in Africa,
Right.
and that was like 15% of the total lending amount. Last year we reached 30 billion, and it was 45%. So it's a very clear thing that Africa is central to the mission of the bank. But we should also not forget that thematically we have also been changing, and what is becoming more and more important is climate financing.
Right.
That didn't exist almost when I was there. Maybe some marginal investments were there. Last fiscal year, we were hitting $21 billion, and it will continue to increase because the challenges are massive. And only together, be it on the bilateral level, be it on the private sector level, be it on the multilateral level, we have to do our maximum effort in this area.
I mean, with the World Bank, you for me, you are kind of at the pulse of the time, because as Austria, we kind of focus on our immediate neighborhood. For us, it's the Western Balkans, what's going on in Europe, maybe in the Ukraine. So this is kind of our logical perspective, and thereby sometimes overlooking problems in Africa, which can easily come back to haunt us, because if Africa decides that there is no future, but you have to go to Europe, then we will have a huge problem. And Africa has always been a continent of the future, but for us it's easy to plan it out. For you cannot, because you will be focused to be where you have to be. I mean, it's just, there's no way of avoiding that.
Well, it is not only avoiding that. We would like to remind people that we become increasingly interconnected. And what COVID has tragically demonstrated is that nobody is safe till everybody is safe. And that climate change is also global. And take Africa. Even though Africa is only responsible for 3% of the emissions, it is disproportionately affected by climate change. And take the Sahel, so with increased desertification. The problem that even what you're seeing with climate, that these things are starting to have spillover effect on the stability of countries. So when you are looking that maybe there is a false perception of security or stability in Europe, when in fact actually in Africa there are underlying tensions, there are either substitute war, substitute conflicts, or where basically the institutions of these institutions are not able to deal with massive challenges, including demographic challenges, religious or other conflicts. And what we are also seeing in our commitments, where you say, well, you scaled up our support to Africa, think of this, that half is right now for fragile and conflict-affected countries. And that shows the incredible responsibility, in my mind, of the entire international community. That is not only on the multilateral level, but also on the bilateral level. How we think about these problems and how we could actually help solve it, because it is smart security policy, but it is also allowing for more long-term peace.
I mean, when we look at COVID, for example, we talked about it, and COVID, of course, is on everybody's mind. And to see that in Europe, we had a bit of a slower start in the United States, but we are now looking at a vaccination rate that's already top 50%. And we look at Africa, and then we're talking about 1 or 2%. And it's almost shameful, because, I mean, their problem, like you said, their problem really is our problem. At the end of the day, you can overlook it for a while, but we will all pay for it, no? But
this is one of the problems. We need to live our solidarity, not only in words, but in deeds. There's, I think the rhetoric is very good.
Right.
The reality is sobering. And that means that the vaccines stay in the OECD countries, and particularly the poorest countries have an extremely hard time to access them. I personally think this is an unacceptable notion. We can do better as an international community than that. And by sharing more of the doses with the country that need them and deserve it. Then even if they get access, what you're saying is that in Europe there was a very quick rollout once it got over the initial hump.
Right.
What it shows is that there are functioning health systems. Austria has an excellent health system.
Sure.
Unfortunately, in many countries, even middle-income countries, health systems are wanting sometimes. So when we look now to the future, we will need to look at better preparedness, and secondly, we will also need to see how we can better improve health systems worldwide.
Well, as they say, rhetoric is nice, but put your money where your mouth is. That's even nicer. Let's just move for a moment to the United States. I mean, you have lived now in the United States for a long time. You've seen many changes. We've seen just very recently from myself, President Biden, now before President Trump. So there have been many changes. Anything that struck you over the years in the United States? I mean, it's a country that has also changed quite a bit over the time.
Well, what struck you, for me, actually what was interesting when I came, and I never realized that so much, the scars of the Civil War. When you are studying in Europe and you come as a kid and you study and you say, well, that was in the 1860s, but actually you're never so aware what even happened after the Civil War, the Jim Crow's laws, the exclusion, and then finally, the increased inclusion over time, but the continuing tensions. And what we are now seeing is that you see that these scars may actually be much deeper than even I thought when I arrived in this country. What is also known is that the politics have been usually here pretty tough. So we should not do as if this was always a friendly exchange if you looked at. But I think there was always a critical mass around the political middle to get the deals. This is more difficult. Now, from a foreigner, what we always should keep in mind is that American foreign policy continues to have a remarkable continuity with bipartisan support. And yes, there are differences, but actually when you look at it, there is quite a bit of, and I have to say that if I look at the World Bank, yes, there are Republican and Democratic administration. If I look at the support these administrations have given, for example, for our Fund for the Poorest, IDA, that has been actually a continuum since 1960. And yes, there have been fights over that in Congress. But what is the remarkable thing is they have been actually relatively easy over the last 20 years. Because I know in my first years in the bank, I recall that the battles for support were harder in Congress at that time to get that approved. So I think we need to differentiate that. What I think is I think something we need to think as Europeans of is the alliance between the United States and Europe. I think they are, it's very important, but some of the divisions have gone deeper. I usually describe the relationship between the United States and Europe like NATO, and I said rock solid and an ocean apart.
Nice.
But we should also not reach always the depths of the ocean. And I think we need to keep it at the surface.
I like that expression. I think that's very, very good and very telling. I love the reference to the Civil War because I went to law school in Virginia with a Fulbright scholarship in 1988, and then we made a trip to Atlanta, Georgia. And I visited the battlefields of the Civil War,
Yes.
and had exactly your experience, because we had an African-American guide who showed us around the battlefields, and then she said, and this is where the Yankees killed our Southern boys. And I was like, gee, I mean, I know that from history books, but it's not present for me. But for her, it was like, they killed our Southern boys. So you're perfectly right. I think it's much deeper than we see from a distance. And it's not that long ago. It's still there. So I very much appreciate that.
As Europeans, we need also to accept this is an interesting country that is an immigrant country and has had the ability to absorb people from all walks of life, from all nationalities, from all religions. And there are many challenges. And many things may not work so well. But in the end, they got together. Europe is now starting to experience much more the contours of a multi-ethnic society. Even actually, Austria has a fair share of foreign population.
Sure.
But usually they were from the neighboring countries. And there sometimes was challenging, because if you come, it depends. If you come from Germany or you came from the Balkans, that was a different story. So I think we need to see how one deals much more with diversity, with inclusion, and tolerance. And I think that is a difficult topic, and what also again. The US experience is showing is you cannot take it for granted.
I like that, and I completely agree. I see this as a big strength of America, that you can bring people in and they will feel American, and it doesn't matter where they come from. And we saw it in Austria just right now. We are now at the time of the Tokyo Olympics, 1 year delayed. And we just had an Austrian who won the bronze medal in judo. But he was a refugee from Chechnya. When he was 10 years old when he came to Austria. And when he won the bronze medal, he could hardly let go of the Austrian flag. So, he was so proud to have won a medal for Austria. And it shows you, the strength of, if you get inclusion right, it makes a country so much stronger, and America has gotten it right on many levels with all the problems that we know, but it makes the country, I think, very strong.
Well, that is the interesting thing is, of course, when there are immigrants, when you're part of the winning game, there are sometimes from that nationality, when they are losing, then there is a different story.
True.
I think what we need to live, I think, in Europe, and I think that in Austria and elsewhere, the interesting thing in the United States, think of somebody like Kissinger, who had a heavy accent.
Sure.
That with a heavy accent, you could get one of the top positions in this administration. That's more difficult in Europe, wherever you are. Whether you are in some Scandinavian country or France, Austria or Italy, it's not easy. Yeah. And that is where I think in Europe we still sometimes need some work, that by celebrating the diversity of the society and what they can contribute. And I think that is something where you can become much stronger.
I completely agree. And when you said Kissinger, and you're perfectly right. I mean, what a heavy accent. But our famous Austrian Arnold Schwarzenegger, governor of California, and he always has this Austrian accent. You can always hear it. And there's no need for him to hide it. Because, in America, it's part of who you are. It's not necessary that you have to talk like an American. You can be someone who has come here, and it might be even charming. It might even show that America is open. So I agree. and maybe sometimes in Europe we have to learn that lesson a little more.
And there's another lesson to learn, is trust trust the power of use. Because people were probably laughing at Arnold Schwarzenegger because he was a bodybuilder, and that is basically something where I think is a strength of the United States, that actually people believe that you can make it.
Yeah.
From wherever you are. And I think this is more important than ever in changing times, that we trust much more younger people, their entrepreneurial spirit, their ideas, as crazy as they may be, but they could be hugely successful. I personally think that, having also studied in Austria and so I think there is an excellent base of education that is offered at high school or in gymnasium and so. I also believe that the university system is good. Now, people can always say, can you improve? Well, you can't improve it all. I've also been in the US system, and in the US sometimes it was more difficult to get in. Then to get out was more difficult, because basically they were interested to give you at any cost your graduation. I think sometimes in Austria the exams were a lot harder, and there was a tougher rating system in place. But it is sometimes then difficult that free spirit, or to give risk capital to the that is, I think, a challenge sometimes in Europe. I think this is where we have a weak spot. While we have huge capabilities and particularly ideas, and we need to tap better into this, and that is where we have to be a little bit more daring.
You know, we've seen it a little bit in if you want to say that, in the vaccine story. I mean, look at Pfizer, BioNTech, where really the brains and the development of the vaccine came from a German company led by Uyghur Shahin,
exactly.
A typical German of Turkish background. But the brains came from Europe, and then the money and the partnership came from Pfizer, and together it was really a success story. So we shouldn't be too shy about our own successes. I completely agree. Just one sentence before we go, because we are almost at the end of our time, and we talked a little bit about it. We talked about Europe, we talked about the United States, but there's one country out there about which everybody is talking these days. It's China. I mean, it's a country that's up and coming, a country of 1.5 billion, a country where a lot of our products is produced in. Where do you see China at this point in time? Where is this going?
Well, first, I think what is always helpful to put this into a historical perspective. Where was China in the 1820s? In the 1820s, the Chinese economy had about 20% of the world economy. It went actually then through a period of prolonged decline, where it really hit its low in the early 1970s, at the end of the Cultural Revolution, with less than 2% of the world economy, which was a total aberration of what you would imagine of a country that represents almost 20% of the world population. I think that this catch-up process of since 1978 has been impressive. Let's also always keep in mind, when those growth rates are being cited, that when you are starting from an extremely low base, then when you grow and you go from $100 to $200, that's fair. But if your income level in Austria increases from, like say, from 40,000 to 42,000, that's 2,000. But basically, it is not so much in percentage.
Sure.
So I think we need to keep that in mind. I think now there are a couple of important questions. First, China is resuming its maybe historical place in the world economy. And that has some tensions because you are putting yourself there. Secondly, I think the world benefited from that catch-up process of China. While it was growing, it also got a lot of cheap goods.
Sure.
So that was, from a consumer perspective, they loved that. But then it comes also that as you assume this place, you become a world power, and then you have bigger interest. And that will create tensions in areas where other interests are being challenged.
Sure.
And so what you are going to see is a multitude of possibilities and tensions. Now, the big challenge is how this is going to be managed. And that is where your profession comes in, diplomacy, is how effective can one actually steer this towards a constructive relationship as opposed to a conflictual relationship. I think that multilateral institutions can contribute to this. We have a couple of very important challenges that cannot be solved on the bilateral or national level. Take the latest COVID,
right.
Take climate change, take some regional conflicts. Unless we cooperate, we are doomed to fail. So how do you use multilateral institutions like the World Bank to create platforms for cooperations among countries where there may be tensions? And then see how we can find in those areas cooperative solutions. I think that would need to be actively employed. It is clearly going to be a different engagement. I also believe that the world is adjusting also to Chinese foreign policy. If you take the foreign policy of Deng Xiaoping, it was really laying low and get prosperous. Very pragmatic one. I think that since the Belt and Road in 2013 is a paradigm change, and I would equate that with the speech of Marshall in April 47, where a paradigm change was described, and with the Marshall Plan of the more difficult relationship with the Soviet Union at the time. It is where a worldview was articulated through the Belt and Road. That was a radical departure from the previous foreign policy. And that is where now everybody has to adjust to how you then maintain the best cooperation possible in the interest of common public goods, but also for yourself and from a bilateral, your job is also to represent forcefully Austrian interest, where the national and for your challenges also for a small country. They may be small, but they have strategic interest, and they need to be satisfied. So that is a more difficult job sometimes, but a more interesting one.
No, I can agree. And, I remember Jean-Claude Juncker was once visiting China, and after the press conference, he took the Chinese leader under his arm and he walked out and he said, you and I, together we have 1.5 million citizens, 5 billion citizens. So, true, small countries have their interests just as much and they have to be represented, but I like your cooperative spirit. I think that's something that's, I think, very Austrian, that we have to try to find a way that we can all kind of benefit from this. And for China, and I think it's true for other leading powers, with great power also comes great responsibility.
But that is where Austria, I think, has been successful. Austria has been successful in projecting itself as a place of meetings, facilitating meetings among countries where there may have been disagreements. and creating there a space of meeting place, and trying to systematically create that space, which is not sometimes easy. We are benefiting from this. Currently, the biggest office in Europe is Vienna, and we love it.
Biggest World Bank office, isn't it?
World Bank office. Sorry, World Bank office, yes. And the Austrian government has been incredibly generous with that, but also I think they do it as part of an of its design to have Vienna as an international meeting place, and I think they see also the bank as part of that effort.
Well, there is no better way to end this than on this moment. Thank you very much. It was really very insightful. It's great to know that you are at such an important position and that you are steering the World Bank together with the president. But that, I think, is really, we know it's in good hands. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.